I do worry that sustainability and sustainable development is becoming jargon. And there are lots of words that become jargon. I also worry that it is presented as a kind of an overly complex scientific issue that will end up, will need a complex scientific answer. And actually an awful lot of it is common sense. So you've asked me two questions. The one is about that, and I think I would love to think that the Commission can play a role in democratising the conversation. I don't think this is something that is just should be left to professors however great they are. I think it's something because the solutions to it are so intimately involve behaviour change by all of us, not just by a few. I think it needs to be a wider conversation. As for the gap between political rhetoric and reality, that is a given in the sense that, UK politicians are by no means unique in talking a good talk and then finding it much harder to put things into
David
practice.
Cameron's, had many headlines by making good speeches on
including
sustainability and
green
economy.
Of course. Sustainability is, you almost have to put it on every ingredient like on a cereal pack. Sustainable this, sustainable that. One of the real problems for not just politicians but people making decisions is precisely that they are often operating within short-term timetables where short-term expediency tends to win over long-term requirements.
On nuclear, do you think it has a role to play in helping us reduce our CO2 emissions?
Nuclear
power.
If you look at energy sources purely through CO2, if you kind of compare them purely on CO2 things, it's definitely one of the lower CO2 emitters. I mean, it isn't zero by any means because there's a whole process around it. But that was less the issue. I think the issue was much more to do with, in an unpredictable climate, in an unpredictable world, the thought of leaving as a legacy waste and management issues that don't just last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but last decades and hundreds of years. I think there's a question about what legacy one's passing on to future generations, and I think the jury is definitely out as to whether that constitutes a responsible piece of sustainable investment. And as I say, the Commission came out against that. I wasn't part of the process, but it was an extremely keenly debated internal conversation, and the result was a majority decision rather than a unanimous one, I'm told, of the Commission.
If they sort out the waste problem, do you think it has a role to play?
That's a big if. I live in a village not very far, on top of a hill actually, but not very far from Dungeness power station. And we defend Dungeness 24 hours a day with bulldozers against erosion from the sea. And I don't know what your Ecology Magazine's version of sea level rise predictions is, but the Tyndall Centre has suggested that governments should be prepared to adapt to 10 metres of sea level rise now. I say now, over the length of the period of warming. So is it a cool thing to have a nuclear power station sitting at sea level with the thought of 10 metres of sea water?
Maybe not that power station, but I meant nuclear power in general.
Nuclear power sits by the sea. You try putting
it doesn't have to be that close to it, though.
It doesn't have to be that close to it, but an awful lot of it does, if you look. And that's where we'll put our new ones, in the UK.
Does GM, genetically modified technology, have a role to play in sustainable development?
Well, I'm going to say I don't know, because personally I don't know, and I haven't been long enough in the job to know.
You've got a background in development.
But I think I have got a background in development, and I've been on the receiving end of countries where, with their populations facing dramatic food shortages, they have banned the import of genetically modified foods because they are concerned, or were concerned at the time, of they're basically adopting the precautionary principle. So states operate very differently around genetically modified food. I've also eaten, hamburgers in the United States, and the full knowledge that the millions also have, and there's no great consequences. I think it's a debate that is being had now. And the food security report that DEFRA produced 2 or 3 days ago clearly hasn't discarded the possibility that GM is going to be part of that food problem. If you look at the supply and demand thing, if you look at the tangle of issues around population, around soil condition, around pollinating insects, around water availability, around climate, weather variability, and don't come to the conclusion that food supply is going to be a problem, then I don't think you're interrogating the information well enough. So food supply, I think, is going to be an issue. And it gets complicated around, because at the same time as we have huge numbers of people with inadequate food around the world, we've also got a burgeoning obesity problem. So food and diet and sustainability is a very important issue. Your question was, is GM part of it? It may well be part of it. I wouldn't be the one to say it definitely wouldn't be. I'm not going to be the one that said it's absolutely critical and vital. But I think the world is looking at a supply and demand challenge across a whole range of issues. Food is one of them. And I think governments are going to have to make very careful decisions about how they respond to that. And food security is also not just about, I have to say, can the planet grow enough food? Where is it going to be grown? If you look at the practical consequences of and predictions around where climate change is likely to have the greatest impacts on agricultural production, the greatest impacts are on those parts of the world that currently export the most food. North America, bits of Latin America, North Africa, Australia basically. Those are our food exporting, bulk exporting countries, and they're the ones that will suffer potentially 50% reductions in food production. So there's a big tangle of things in there. We have an election, general election, inevitably coming up before next summer. How can we have the issues that we know are important part of the national debate rather than marginalised? The decisions that government will need to take in the next 5 years are absolutely fundamental decisions. And I think all of us want those to be the best informed and the best decisions possible.